Daily Words of God. Man has ever lived beneath the shroud of the influence of darkness, held in bondage to the influence of Satan, unable to escape, and his disposition, having been processed by Satan, becomes increasingly corrupt. It can be said that man has always lived amid his corrupt satanic disposition and is incapable of truly loving God. This being so, if man wishes to love God, he must be stripped of his self-righteousness, self-importance, arrogance, conceit, and the like. Everything that is of Satan's disposition. If not, his love is an impure love, a satanic love, and one which absolutely cannot receive the approval of God. Without being directly perfected, dealt with, broken, pruned, disciplined, chastened, and refined by the Holy Spirit, no one is able truly to love God. If you say that a part of your disposition represents God, and therefore you are able truly to love God, then you are someone whose words are arrogant, and you are preposterous. Such people are the archangel. The inborn nature of man is incapable of directly representing God. He must shed his innate nature through the perfection of God, and only then, only by caring for God's will, fulfilling God's intentions, and furthermore, undergoing the work of the Holy Spirit, can what he lives out be approved by God. No one who lives in the flesh can represent God directly, unless he be a man used by the Holy Spirit. However, even for a person like this, it cannot be said that his disposition and what he lives out entirely represent God. It can only be said that what he lives out is directed by the Holy Spirit. The disposition of such a man cannot represent God. Though the disposition of man is ordained by God, this is unquestionable and can be considered a positive thing. It has been processed by Satan, and so the whole of man's disposition is Satan's disposition. Some people say that God's disposition is to be straightforward in doing things, and that this is also manifested in them, that their character is also like this. And so they say that their disposition represents God. What kind of people are these? Is the corrupt satanic disposition able to represent God? Whosoever declares that their disposition is representative of God blasphemes God and insults the Holy Spirit. The method by which the Holy Spirit works shows that God's work on earth is solely the work of conquest. As such, the many corrupt satanic dispositions of man have yet to be cleansed. What he lives out is still the image of Satan. It is what man believes to be good, and it represents the deeds of man's flesh. More precisely, it represents Satan and absolutely cannot represent God. Even if someone already loves God to the extent that they are able to enjoy a life of heaven on earth, are able to make such statements as, "Oh God, I cannot love you enough," and have reached the highest realm, still it cannot be said that they live out God or represent God. For the essence of man is unlike that of God, and man can never live out God, much less become God. What the Holy Spirit has directed man to live out is only in accordance with what God asks of man. All the actions and deeds of Satan are manifested in man. Today, All of the actions and deeds of man are an expression of Satan, and hence cannot represent God. Man is the embodiment of Satan, and the disposition of man is unable to represent the disposition of God. Some people are of good character. God may do some work through such people's character, and the work they do is directed by the Holy Spirit. Yet their disposition is unable to represent God. The work God does upon them is nothing more than working with and expanding on what already exists within. Be it prophets in ages past, or those used by God, no one can directly represent Him. People come to love God only under the duress of circumstances, and not a single one strives to cooperate of their own volition. What are positive things? All that directly comes from God is positive. The disposition of man, however, has been processed by Satan and cannot represent God. Only the love, the will to suffer, the righteousness, submission, and humbleness and hiddenness of the incarnate God directly represent God. This is because when He came without a sinful nature and came directly from God, without having been processed by Satan. Jesus is only in the likeness of sinful flesh and does not represent sin. Therefore, His actions, deeds, and words, up to the time prior to His accomplishment of the work through crucifixion, including the moment of His crucifixion, are all directly representative of God. The example of Jesus is sufficient to prove that anyone with a sinful nature cannot represent God, and that the sin of man represents Satan, which is to say, sin does not represent God, and God is sinless. Even the work done in man by the Holy Spirit can only be considered to have been directed by the Holy Spirit, and cannot be said to be done by man on behalf of God. But as far as man is concerned, neither his sin nor his disposition represents God. By looking at the work the Holy Spirit has done on man from the past to the present day, one sees that man has that which he lives out, all because the Holy Spirit has done work upon him. Very few are able to live out the truth after being dealt with and disciplined by the Holy Spirit, which is to say, only the work of the Holy Spirit is present. Cooperation on the part of man is absent. Do you see this clearly now? This being so, how will you do your utmost to cooperate with Him and fulfill your duty when the Holy Spirit works?